I know that many of you have come from some distance, and it's appreciated because I think we'll make this 6-class session something you can take home and think about for a long time. Can you hear me well? No? Can you hear me now?
Better.
Not good. Why is that? What are we going to do about it? Is it all right? I want to dedicate this class to the Spirit of God in all of us. With a reminder that unless we are true to that Spirit, it cannot lift us, direct us, serve us, and establish God's kingdom on earth, which is its purpose. I'd like us all to feel the presence of God in this room, the presence of Christ, the presence of truth, and the assurance that when we leave this room, that same presence is always with us. That any time we forget the presence, we lose on what is always with us. And when we cultivate the knowledge, the recognition, and the assurance that the presence is always with us, there is something happens to you. Something takes you and lifts you out of what you call yourself. And it moves in you. And it directs you. And you feel the wonder of the light. And that is what we will try to develop today. The assurance that when we walk this earth, everything negative that happens to us is a lie that we can depend upon. And in time, we will learn that everything good that happens to us is an equal lie, the good and the bad. And in time, we will learn to walk between the good and the bad and find the divine, the real, the eternal, that which is ever with you. I know it is possible. I know many of us will do it, and it is our earnest hope that we can all share, not in a brief experience, but in a permanent assurance, a permanent way of life that is engendered during this class in a certain way, and that when it strikes us, we feel its presence, we feel it grow within us, and we never walk without it again. These things are said because they are true. "700 years before the Master walked on earth, Isaiah made a prediction. His prediction was recorded. We read it in chapter 64. It is a very important prediction. It was probably the greatest word on earth up to that moment. Something that we, in our sense of humanhood, too often forget And then, because it's forgotten, we don't know that we must believe it. We must know it. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered, nor come into mind. But be ye glad, rejoice forever in that which I created. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing, and her people a joy. Now, as you recall, this was prominently stated, but not from Isaiah, in the revelation of St. John. As the central character went up the ladder of spirit, he heard the voice say, behold, I create a new heaven and a new earth. This was 700 years before. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and dust shall be the serpent meat. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountains, saith the Lord. 700 years later, there was a different picture on the earth. We find in Galilee the man who was the predicted, who would lift heaven and earth, was in dire straits. Hardly anyone knew him. Judaism was turned against him. Christianity was not yet in the world. There wasn't a single Christian. And they gave the people a choice between the man in the dungeon and Jesus. Which shall we crucify? And the verdict was instantaneous. There wasn't a voice raised that we do not crucify Jesus. That was the human consciousness. They didn't know who Jesus was. He was just an upstart from Galilee, making lots of noise, they thought, making people uncomfortable. But they didn't know him then. And to our sense of truth, they don't know him now. Jesus was a mysterious figure, unknown to very few, although there were a few who did know him. He was selected. He was selected by the Father. And he was put into mortal appearance upon the earth. And he made statements about his appearance. In time he said, I have overcome the world. No one knew what that meant. Before Abraham was, I am. Very few knew what that meant. I wonder how many of us know what that meant. I think you could say that you can separate the sheep from the goats maybe by that statement. When a man says, before Abraham was, I am, he's not saying that I am reincarnate. That is 1/100th of what he is saying. What he is saying is, I'm not what you see. You see a man called Jesus. Don't believe it. I am here on a mission. I am called Jesus because I must appear before you with a name. And I'm to teach you, and you, and you, and every one of you who is aware of truth, who is yearning for truth, who is destined to live in truth, that my true name is not Jesus, and your true name is not the name that you give. This was the teaching. For I am Christ, and you are Christ, and though you know it not, at the start, you must learn that we are one. We are children of the Father. We are all the same I, Christ. In the visible world, there are many mortals. But I will train you, and when you make your transition into the higher realm, it won't be through death. It will be a transition made joyously with the understanding that you have earned the first step in the passage from mortality to divinity. And that step comes with the recognition that you are not yourself. You're not a man or woman of flesh. Not you will not become a man or woman of flesh, but you are not a man or woman of flesh at this moment. And I will teach you that you are not, he said, and you will learn that you and I are one being. Never divide God's garment, because there is one being. I, the Christ, am teaching the Christ that he is one being. We are all the one Christ. And until we learn that, we stumble in our mortality. We stumble in the way of fear, lack, limitation, all of it untrue, all because we do not know how to identify ourselves and to live as we are. We do not invite the spirit of our being to live through us. This is quite different than the world knows. The world which divides itself into this religion and that religion. Our only religion is the religion of truth which God placed upon the earth. We'll call it Christianity, because it's the belief in the Christ, the knowledge that the Christian is yourself. You are that Christ. Before we leave this class, we may be shocked to discover that not only are we that Christ, but we will feel that knowledge. And we will try to keep that knowledge ever present, uppermost, and we will discover that that knowledge finally infiltrates the being, goes before you. It teaches you what nothing else can. It speaks to you. Finally, it lives you. And I mean that not for any one select person, but for all, because we are all that one Christ. And when we say we are Christians, we don't mean that we accept certain literature that comes down, that we subscribe to certain laws, or that we think of God a certain way. We mean that we are the Christ. And we learn how to live as the Christ. That is our bread, our wine, our water, our life. Isaiah said, a new heaven and a new earth. That was a complete departure from the old heaven and the old earth. But it wasn't for that day. It was a prediction. The Spirit was talking through Isaiah. It wasn't announcing anything that would happen that day. It was stating that Christ would be sent in the form of Jesus and would walk upon the earth. And Christ would teach everyone who aspired to true Christianity that his very nature had to be the living Christ. You could not be a Christian and not be the living Christ. It is not that you worship the Christ, you were the Christ. And maybe when we review this chapter in the Bible, maybe perhaps we find one here and one there who says to himself, I feel the nature that is being expressed as mine. At the time it was said, and the time it was enacted 700 years later, there was no connection. Very few people could even relate to the truth of what was said. You could see that at the time because the Jewish mind at that time had no concept whatsoever of what Christ stood for. The Jewish concept at that time was in an external God. A God who laid down laws. Well, it seems like today we in this work look back and think of that as a sort of a prison. Everyone was held down. No one was lifted up. No one saw the light. And so the Hebrews of that day were trodden under. They were ruled by Rome. And the Romans of that day were no better. They had a material point of view. There was no knowledge of the divinity of being. And divinity was not on earth, so that men could see it. And yet every Roman, as well as the people they were persecuting, was the invisible Christ. And that sounds strange perhaps to us, and it will until we are lifted from the cosmic illusion. We can't imagine a person being the Christ and yet acting in a way that was completely opposite to a Christ way of living. Murdering, robbing, plundering, all forms of iniquity. As the Roman developed this attitude and became the superior man in the world, the Hebrew became subservient. And everywhere you went, everyone was subservient to Rome. And yet 700 years before, Isaiah had seen the liberation from that subservience, which shows you that the spiritual event that happened with Isaiah was not recognized or understood by the public. It had nothing to do with the public. It was the advance notice given to those who had a degree of awareness that one day it would appear to men in a different light than it appeared that day. Now came one sent by the light. Came the Christ who was not known as the Christ, was known as Jesus. He had a mother and a father. To all intents and purposes, he was just another man. But we see when he was 2 years old that the assassins were sent by the Sanhedrin, the reigning Hebrew body. And why couldn't they kill him? They killed every 2-year-old and 3-year-old they could find. Why couldn't they kill him? Couldn't they locate him? He was easy to locate, but he wasn't there. They couldn't find this lad. Why couldn't they find him? Because the Christ is not visible on earth. You have never seen the Christ. No one on this earth has seen the Christ. We've seen several who know they are the Christ, several who say they are the Christ, but they're in flesh. That's not Christ. Christ is incorporeal. And you're beginning to get an idea of the nature of the cosmic illusion. You're beginning to get an idea, though you do not feel it yet, that there is an incorporeal you, which is Christ, and a visible you, which wears the name of man or woman, human, and maybe even a visible you which knows I am not man or human, but you appear to be. You will learn that the invisible Christ of the Father is why you are called the Son of the Father. And it doesn't have to happen tomorrow or come about in the future. It is now. You will become aware of it in what is called the future, but it is the fact now. It could never happen later. And so if I know you, as the Christ, you will discover that I have stated the truth. And if you know your friend as the Christ, even though he's a robber, or a thief, or a murderer, or a nice person, you will discover that all are the Christ beneath the surface of human reality. There never is a dead Christ. So there couldn't be a crucifixion of Christ. Christ is alive eternally, and so are you. And you will know it someday. You will realize it someday. And you will see why this book, although it's a mystery to most of the people of the earth, to you it will be an open book, not a mystery, a glorious revelation of your identity. You can't say some people are Christ and some are not. God has one child, and that is Christ. And that one is infinite. How can you be the infinite Christ? Because you're not what you appear to be. And we must learn that we're not what we appear to be, that we are the infinite Christ. And when you look at another person with that realization in your heart, in your soul, you will find that is the only protection you need in this world. You will find when the ultimate realization strikes you that your bread is provided, whatever you need is provided, your path is provided, and all you need do is hold to the truth that I am the invisible Christ, though I walk in a body of flesh. But you must have that truth in you understood in order to walk in it. It's not a truth you're going to borrow. It's a truth that will slowly become part of your being. And that's the value of our class this weekend. Each of us is to learn how to walk in a world that it seems to be mortal as an immortal, who is known to himself and herself as a living Christ. And everyone on earth, though unknown to you, is that same Christ. Every religion on earth is that same Christ. Every child, though the child be an infant, though it be an adult, it's in its late 80s and 90s, it's the same Christ in each case. The person is not the Christ. The Christ is a concealed being. And humanhood conceals Christianity, conceals the Christ of each individual. As you develop the capacity to feel it, to know it, you will find an exceptional release, somewhat unanticipated, and a bursting joy that you can't control. Because you'll see then that the Father must provide for His Son. The Christ must have everything the Father has, because the Christ is the Son. And the moment you let this doubt into your mind, how can I have all that the Father has? Look what I've got. It doesn't show up. Look at these bones that are tired. Look at this aching idea. Look at this over here that is a cold. Look at this that must be operated on. Look at these physical ailments that I've got. This economic disorder. Look at my family. This one has this and this one has that. But they don't, you see. They have it in your mind. That's the problem. And they have it in their mind. And you cannot face that with the denial. You must know. They can't have it, that's all. I know who they are. And you will find that the healing quality is in you when you are aware of the truth, that you don't have a family of 5 and they're squabbling today, or a family of 3 and they're unhealthy, or some who are bad and some who are good and some who are incorrigible and some who are wonderful. No, you have everything in your family as you see it, but not as God sees it. We all have the perfect Christian family in every respect, far beyond anything we had dreamed that we could discover or broadcast. So when you know the truth, your lips will be sealed so tight because there's nothing you can tell anyone. Nobody would hear you. They would strive to hear you, but they cannot hear you. They must realize they are the Christ. And you will learn after a while that you can teach this to those near and dear, and they can teach it to those who are further away. Today, in the world, all the disruption that goes place in what was once Russia, all the disruption that goes place in Iran, Iraq, that's Christ over there. When we realize that's Christ there, Christ will appear to you in the invisible. And if you don't realize it, you'll have to suffer your karma. Because every recognition of any being on this earth who is not Christ is what produces karma. Every recognition that this one is different than this one, or better than this one, or worse than this one, is what produces karma. And in a political year, karma is rampant. The Christ, appearing as Jesus, said, "I have overcome the world." We didn't realize that was a statement of identity. We thought he was special. He had done something wonderful. He had been rewarded some way. But he was saying, I am the Christ. And the Christ has overcome the world. Don't get the mistake that Jesus has overcome the world. Christ has overcome the world. I am the Christ. So he said, I have overcome the world. To tell those who wanted to know, who were seeking to know, who were able to know, that this was the Christ of God, the Christ of themselves, that beneath the flesh of every one dwells the same Christ. Not an individual Christ, but the same self. Of course, that's beyond our capacity to see how a self can be all selves. But you're only in the 4th level of consciousness. When you're in the 5th, it'll become clarified. When you see countries who have become Christed, the miracle of God will become so vast that this world that we live in not only has no reality, but it's just a puff of smoke. Something that we have learned through our senses, something that we do with our mind, something that we do without Christ recognition. So it divides up into good and bad, sick and well, all kinds of opposites. And here, there, one here, another there, becomes aware that there is no opposite. That's the healing. Now, when we say we live in a world of miracles, we are hardly beginning to say it, because the miracles are the recognition of Christ wherever you are. And whatever miracle appears is a Christ miracle. I may be speaking to someone whose family has got a problem, but I'm saying to that someone, they only have their belief in a problem. It's real to them. I mean, they're either broke and can't pay the rent, or Uncle John has got to go to the doctor, or something. There's the problem in their mind. And it'll stay there. But you must know that the problem is the absence of the awareness that the Spirit of God is the only life in that family. That's the true life of the family. And the family living next door has the same life. So when you begin to accept the omnipresence, there are no exceptions. It's not in this house it's omnipresent, and in that house it isn't. Each is as perfect as God. And so when you try the healing work, what are you doing actually? You're looking at the Christ, and your eyes, your human eyes, do not see the Christ, and you either believe your eyes or you know what you feel in your inner self. We are elated when the person recovers from our work, but truth is no miracle. Truth is, truth is. Each one of us who aspires to that healing work should become deeply mired in the truth that every person I heal is the Christ, and I'm merely recognizing it. And that recognition will be contrary to everything you see and feel at first, because you haven't accepted it in yourself. And when you first accept it as Christ where I am, you will see why Christ where you are is automatic. It's difficult to accept yourself as Christ, because even though you may even believe it, you believe you're invisibly perfect, but it doesn't become visible. You believe you have the Christ mind, but you don't find a way to use that Christ mind. You've got this other mind, this human mind. So you work with that. And every chance you get that you're told something negative, you say, that's what the human mind believes. What about the Christ mind that I have? What does it believe? What does my Christ mind decide about Iraq? What does my Christ mind decide about the level of inflation, the deflated currency? What does my Christ mind see about these physical ailments. Well, let's go through the Bible for a minute. Let's look at what the Christ mind did there. Because that's what we're showing you. Here's what the Christ mind believes and knows and demonstrates about physical ailments, which everybody thinks is out here. The nobleman's son was dying. Why would a Christ mind, who never had seen the nobleman's son, who didn't even go into his presence, cause a state of recovery? Let's go through that. Let's see how it was working. Let's see how close we can come to it. The nobleman said, "My son is ailing." And then it was Jesus who was the Christ and knew himself to be the Christ of the Son, because the Christ is a universal being, and Christ knows it to be so. Well, if he says, "My son is ailing," he's saying Christ is ailing, because I don't have a son. Christ is that reality. And the Son doesn't know it either, but I am that one, and I am this one. I am everyone. But you are Christ, so you are everyone. And when you know you're Christ, and someone says that person is sick, and you say to yourself, "Well, he doesn't know I'm not one." And that Christ shows forth as well. That Christ and you are two in my name. The Christ of you and the Christ of you in the other self, which thinks it's a person, are the two in my name. And when the two in my name agree, have the same realization, there's a healing. And so when you heal somebody, you're going to go about it the way beginners do. They work hard and they do these things. They do everything they're supposed to do, and it takes time. But in time, they learn that they went about it the wrong way, and they did what a beginner should do. But now I have come through that process, and I know the Christ of that person is me. I am the Christ. And everyone who comes to me for help is the Christ. Truly is. But they are the Christ unbeknown to themselves. And so recognition of them as the Christ and myself as the Christ should produce the healing. If there is something in the consciousness that isn't accepting part of your inner declaration, or hasn't the capacity to accept it, then that will be delayed as a healing. But if the lines are clear, there are two in my name, always present in every healing. The patient is Christ. The patient is never human. The patient never has a busted leg or a broken vocal cord or anything that we think on the human scene that the patient has. That's not what the patient has. The patient has the appearance of. And now you see why the Bible says, "Judge not after appearances." Because any appearance that you judge isn't there. It's there to the human sight, which is an aberration. The human sight always sees what it thinks is there. It can look at perfection and think it's there. The human sight never saw Jesus in his true self. That's why when Pilate said, "Which one shall I crucify?" Crucify Jesus. Could they say crucify Jesus if they could see what was there? And that's typical of us. We never see what is there, We always see what we think is there. And that's the difference between the image and the reality. We look at the image in our mind and we think it's an external reality. And it's hard to learn. It's terrible to have to learn it, but it's a release, and it's your salvation to learn that what you look at, either good or bad, is not there. When you're looking at everything as an image in your mind. You think you're looking out there, and you're seeing what's out there, but you're not. Because everything you're seeing is an image in your mind. And that's a hard thing to grasp, hard thing to accept. But all that's out there is the invisible Christ. That's the first step in learning the truth. The Christ is everywhere I look. And I can't see the Christ, but my soul can accept it. So we'll be still with this. We'll learn to rest in the knowledge that the invisible Christ is the entire world population. You all see a man up here allegedly addressing the group down there, and vice versa, all responding to one another. Now look at the invisible, please. When you look at the invisible, you may see nothing. You will find an ability to look at the invisible one day, maybe sooner than you understand that it can happen. When you look at it, you will finally become aware that there is one soul that is teaching us. There is no physical person here teaching. There is no physical person there listening. There is one soul at this side of the desk and the other side of the desk. And that soul is drawing sustenance from the invisible. That soul is sharing that sustenance. Please know that you are a living soul. And all that you need, all that you require is in your soul, and it will always be there. There is no power on the earth to touch your soul. You will find that death can never touch you or any member of your family. The soul will see to that. The soul is undying. The soul consciousness goes before everyone. And we do not have to be in soul for the soul to be us. We have to be in the soul to come to an understanding of what is happening to us. But the soul will always provide your needs. So if they tell you that your daughter or your mother or your father or anyone you know died last week or the week before, there is no death in the kingdom of God. Please know that. And there is no place but the kingdom of God. Never buy the idea of death or disease or problems, because they take place in the illusion. That is the only place a death or a disease or a problem can take place. They cannot take place in the reality which is all present. Let's clarify the air of the belief that I'm going to die tomorrow, I'm going to die in a third year from now, or I'm going to die in my 27th year. You will never die, because the death that takes place will be the mortal shell. Yes, that will, but it will not die. It will depart because you have not recognized who you are, and you are responsible for the appearance of death that does occur. If you had recognized your identity, the appearance of death would not occur. And so let's start recognizing our identity. And if you leave out another individual, you'll do what Jesus said you cannot do. When he went and visited those on earth who were in prison, and his people said to him, well, when did he visit them? I don't know. He didn't go there to visit them. He recognized invisibly that each was the same divine self. And I'm advising you to begin to apply this to everyone you know. You're worried about your granddaughter. Why are you worried about your granddaughter? Because you don't believe he's a divine self. Well, she's a divine self. You don't believe it. That's why you're worried. And of course you can't believe it if you don't know it. That's why you've got to go dig deep and find out that you have been the divine self long before you appeared on this earth. You'll always be long after you disappear from this earth. Divinity can't die, and the only thing alive is divine self. We either have been asleep or wrongly taught, and we have all assumed that we are this human body of flesh. And we don't realize that the body of flesh, which is there in appearance only, cannot be a self. It's an image. And we have images in thought, which are the same as having a disease. That's an image in thought. Having lack is an image in thought. All forms of lack or even abundance are images in thought. What you have is all that the Father has. And that's not an image in thought. That's a reality. And when you know what the Father has, the more you know about yourself. Now we're being taught by the soul. The soul cannot make mistakes. So if you go out and you are disobedient to what your soul is trying to teach you, or you can't understand it, you're using something other than that which is required of you. You're in the human mind. And the human mind cannot understand the soul. So the soul says to you, you're going to die in 30 days, because there's no sense in teaching you what you can't learn. You'll have to be reborn. You'll have to be reborn until you're able to learn that you are the divine self. And if you want to speed up your realization so that you can speed up your living in divinity, then you have to get busy and brush away those cobwebs which all deny your identity. Think of how your identity is being denied this very day. Now you'll come up and see me and you'll say, I'm better. Or you'll say, that is recovery. Or you'll say something of that nature, all indicating that you have recovered from something, and you don't know that you have not recovered from anything. You've recovered from a human belief, which is not recovery. Recovery is nothing you can do in a divine sense. And so when you say, I'm recovered, you're saying, I am not the child of God. Now, I'm being tough with you, but I'm being tough with a purpose. I want to reach the point where we have the children of God assemble only, and talks will become a different thing. It's not to convey information, but rather to share the presence of God, which is what we could be doing now. But when a person says, I'm better than what? Better than the mortal I was who wasn't better. But you're not that mortal. So that's the real difficulty. The self you think you were or are, not the self you are accepting. And why aren't you accepting? Because you say, well, how can I say I'm divine if I have a pain or if I have a problem? Well, Jesus was suffering. He was lying there. He had gone through every humiliation and torture you can imagine. All the people were shouting, kill him, crucify him. All the people who came to him were suffering. What did he do? What did he do when this man came to him and said, save my daughter, she's 12 years old, she's dying, I don't know what's the matter with her. I don't even have an ailment that the doctors in this town don't know what she's suffering from. What did he do? First place, he accepted that she was him, and he was her. Where there are two in my name, that's the recognition of divinity. As soon as he knew she was divine, which was for him no problem, she was receptive then to the teaching, to the truth. He didn't touch her. He didn't whisper in her ear. He didn't even do anything that had anything to do with her, it would seem, except no, this girl is not a girl. This is the Spirit of God. This dying girl isn't a dying girl. This is Christ. Can you do that with your ailments? Just as if Jesus were doing it? Let's see, how do we go about it? I've got a terrible pain in my hip. Can I say that I am the Christ? Yes. That's the first step. Where is the pain? In your physical hip. Well, God is 100% spirit. So if you've got a physical hip, what's that got to do with God? But God never made any physical hips. How did you get one? I'm serious. God never even made a heart that fails. How did we get one? So you see, we have these imaginary ailments. And I mean it. I-M-A-G-I-N-A-R-Y. We think they're real. If that hurts me, and the doctor comes, and he thinks I'm going to be put on the list for the coroner, how can I possibly think of myself as Christ? Well, if you're thinking long enough, in 30 days when the heart would be ill, let's say, that Christ awareness is a little stronger, and in 30 years it gets very strong. It can be that strong in a day. So constantly, never accept the judgment of you that people give you. That's that housewife down the street who's married to so-and-so, or that's that man down the street who goes to work in the morning and does that. Let people feel whatever they want. But you know, the only one here is the Spirit of God called Christ. And I know that the one who misidentified me is that Spirit too. And as long as you identify the universe and everyone in it as a living Christ, you may not reach the point of Jesus, who could know everyone that way without even making any inside adjustment. You will find that people are going to seek you out because everybody doesn't know they are responding to this invisible impulse. When someone thinks you are the Christ, there will be an invisible impulse. And these impulses begin to spring up around you. More and more people begin to feel that you are the Christ. They even persuade you that you are. Now let's resume our awareness that I am the Christ, and let's not find that we break it up. I mean, don't stop when you go to sleep and become a human being and wake up in the morning and have to remind yourself that you're a human being or you are the Christ. Let's establish the 24-hour truth that I cannot say this to my neighbor, but I am the one called the Christ. Everywhere I go, you'll be wanting to say it occasionally, but people will think that you're a little touched. But you'll have the last laugh, because you'll find that the people you speak to and know that they are the Christ will feel better. They won't know that you think they're the Christ, but they'll feel better, and they won't know why. And you'll find that you feel better. And as you develop this capacity to know that Christ is everywhere, but invisible, never the visible person. The visible person is the image that the mind makes of everyone. The husband who looks at his wife doesn't know he's got an image of her in his mind. He thinks that's her standing out there. But that's not her standing out there. What's standing out there is the image in his mind. And what she sees of him is the image in her mind. Two images. And they're married. But that's not marriage. That's why the Christ never marries. You see that? There's no physical being to marry. The Christ is the one Spirit of God, the infinite one. So when you have to go to your next phase on the journey, into the higher level. When you have been attracted to that phase, that will be because you have passed certain things behind you in the world. You don't think children are children anymore. You don't think men are men, and you don't think women are women. They become different beings. Each becomes what he is. And when you recognize what he is, not what he appears to be, you become eligible too. Now Jesus took, I suppose he healed 10,000 people, but they weren't people. That's why healing was so simple for him. He'd take anyone. If he couldn't see, what of it? His eye couldn't see. He looked at someone and he said, I see you and I see you, but his eye didn't see what was there. So his eye wasn't seeing a thing. His eye was always seeing an image. Now when you have the Christ vision, you're not seeing images. And that Christ vision isn't going to happen in one day. But it doesn't see images. It sees the Son of God everywhere. And it sees the Son of God who commands everything that the Father commands. And so, if that Son of God is looking as a human being and acting like a human being, he still has everything that God has. And that's why Christ brings it out of him. He doesn't give him the eyesight. He gives him the human vision of eyesight. But the vision, the Christ vision, is in this fellow who's lying there, even dead. When you're dead in the physical world, nothing in you has died. You have not died one moment, because you will then reincarnate, start living this human life again, and the Christ can bring out of you those qualities of God which were in you at the beginning, which is no beginning. The dawn of life in the physical world is the beginning of the illusion, not the end of the illusion. If we can all develop this capacity to go back before our birth and try to understand that before my birth I was a being, I was a divine being, and then as I came into birth I came into the illusion of flesh. I'm really not a man or woman. I'm not a child. I'm a divine being, and my name is Spirit. Oh, I look like a man or I look like a woman, and I act like one of them. But my name is Spirit. And only the attributes of Spirit are mine. And those are wonderful attributes. I am everywhere. There is no place where Spirit is not. I have every attribute of the Father, but I must first realize that I am not physical being. I am a spiritual being, and that can be realized. And then what the Father has, I have, because I and the Father are one Spirit. I and Jesus Christ are one Spirit. Every being on the earth is that one Spirit. And that's why in the Ten Commandments we first learn that we have certain qualities of God, and then there are two added to that. And we can truthfully say that whatever the Father has is mine. We might add what we have not thought of adding. Whatever the Father has not is not mine. Everything that the Father hasn't got, I don't have. I can't have what the Father doesn't have. I can only have what the Father does have. What the Father doesn't have doesn't exist. And what the Father has doesn't exist in the physical world. You will be surprised when your body moves out of your experience and you find you're in a non-physical world. I don't suppose that even talking about it will prepare you for that, but some of us are apt to find it out sooner than we thought. When the physical body is not there, it will be because your mind has dropped the misbelief that I have a physical body, and you will find that you're in the Christ mind, which is not the human mind. The human mind thinks in terms of physicality. The Christ mind knows better. It accepts a spiritual body. You're going to have to learn about that spiritual body, because you'll be walking the kingdom of God in one. Now, Jesus was on the earth to convert the human consciousness to the spiritual consciousness, to convert the human consciousness to the divine consciousness. That was the mission given to him in heaven by the Father. He had to have the human disguise, but you were reminded that he wasn't born a woman. You were given clues that this was a special being. You see how ignorant the world was at that day, that even though Isaiah had told them 700 years before that he discovered a new heaven and a new earth, they just heard words. Nobody knew what he was saying. And so when Jesus appeared, that was the fruition of that prophecy. And when Jesus did his demonstrations on the earth, that was the fruition of that prophecy, and his ability to take a person of the earth and convert his qualities not in the image and likeness of man, but in the image and likeness of the Father, so that a man would be recovered from something that was ungodly, and there'd be no sign of what made him recover. He didn't take any pills, he didn't go to a doctor, he didn't get operated on. All of the things that we do today, he hadn't done. He had taken him into the laboratory of his own consciousness. And all he had done was take away that which the man was not. He didn't add anything to him. In his consciousness, he only knew the truth of what the man was. And the man responded through his consciousness to showing what the consciousness of Jesus knew he was. Let's be still a moment and review in our minds some of the cases that he took, and see how we can find a comparison to people we know and to ourselves, perhaps. Now, if it's possible, and I believe it is, you should learn to look at truth in a different way than you have been accustomed to looking at it. You should learn instantly that what you have called a truth is not. Now, it may be possible for some of you to look at truth and know truth, and I'm not speaking of your ability to do that. I'm speaking of those who do not have that ability. If you do not have the capacity to know truth, then you'll have to start with one truth that you can count on. Never think that you are not the child of God. That is identity. That is basic identity. I am the child of God. Now, when you accept that, you started to heal yourself. You are provided for by God, 100%. Who provided you with those qualities that are not divine? Even your vision, even though it's 20/20, who provided you with that quality? You're wrong if you think God did. God provided you with nothing that you will ever lose. Someday you will not have that vision. You will not be able to hear or talk. God didn't give you those qualities. Those are the counterfeits. Those are the cosmic illusion. God gave you permanent vision, not to see with your eyes, to see with your soul. God gave you permanent hearing, not to hear with your ears. Thus the sounds of the world are not divine, but to hear with your soul. Your soul has permanent qualities. And I'm not saying some souls have and some souls have not. There's only one soul. One soul. Your soul can see, hear, taste, touch in a different way than touching the surface of things. Your soul will never look at an individual and say, you have cancer. Because your soul only knows the one Christ. And because the Christ never has cancer, the soul is not concerned about cancer. And you say, well, what about me? You are the one Christ. And if you don't know it, you may have the cancer. You won't know it. You won't recognize the cancer. It will even tell you you can't have cancer when you know you are that one. And I mean it will tell you that. When it heals you of something where you had thought it was going to lead to a rather total experience of death, and then you don't die, your soul will tell you why you didn't die. It will tell you you couldn't die. That was a person you were thinking of. You're not that person. Christ doesn't die. You can't crucify Christ. So they called Christ in. He went first. He was tried on the earth. He was tried by his so-called human peers. Annas, Caiaphas, then Pontius Pilate, finally Golgotha. Now they were going to put him to death, and they did. When he had the last speck of life in him, or the last speck of what they thought was life, he was as much the Christ as he ever was. You cannot crucify the Christ. You can crucify a man, and if the man thinks he's a man, which everyone does, he can be crucified. But this man was not a man. He had been selected to convert the universe of men into Christhood. With his last ounce of human breath, he was as much the Christ as he ever would be. He was the Christ of everyone who was crucifying him. Do you see the absurdity? Self doesn't crucify self. There's only one self. Why was he doing that? If he had shown so much in his lifetime, I can escape this, I can make him escape that, I can take this away from him, and I can take that pain away from her. Why in his last breath didn't he do something? You've never been told why. The world doesn't know. He was showing that death is an illusion. That's why. You will kill me and you will think I am dead. And you have just killed an illusion. You have killed a mortal being. And there aren't any. They are not out there. They're in the eyes of each mortal. Each mortal looks out at what he thinks is mortality, and it's in himself. Each mortal goes to a grave. But he doesn't go to a grave. He's buried in himself, in his own mentality. One who knows he's the Christ will also go to a grave in his physical appearance, but he's not in the grave. Christ is in the kingdom always. While Jesus was appearing in this kingdom, Christ of Jesus was in the kingdom. You've got to get used to some of these thoughts, because they're true ones. And the Christ of Jesus was being slaughtered by the physical concept called men, who have no life in them, and was slaying non-life. And the Christ was there to teach all men just that very thing, that what is happening here is the human illusion. Never think that you will die. What will die of you is your human illusion. And someday you will know what an illusion is, not by saying it, not by knowing it as something you think you see. You will feel the absence of the illusion. And you will realize all that could be buried of me was what I had thought I was. And I'm not that at all. I mean, you will have that experience of knowing you're not that. And if we could, well, we'll meditate on it a little later, but when we meditate on it, I want to first preface it with a few thoughts about it. The Jesus that was therefore looking at the members of the Sanhedrin and the people of the court, and then later at everybody who was saying crucify him. That was the Christ looking through the human illusion. That was Christ bringing it all to a head so that we could learn that when the human illusion seems real, the Christ who still walks out of that illusion is showing that death is impossible for the infinite Christ. And the fact that they said God raised him was that they didn't know what else to say. This is a very delicate point. You never die. I will be put under the grave just like everyone else. But I will never die. You will never die. Because you and I are the one Christ. We are the same. And as we learn that, you'll find you can look at all of the forms that are saying crucify him, crucify him, crucify him, and you know that they have no existence. You can look at all of the nations that attack. You can look at the flying forces that are sent in to bomb, and you can know, yes, the bombs will land, they will bury the bodies. There's nobody in those bodies. The Christ is not in those bodies, and the Christ is the only one on earth. That's the lesson. The Christ is the only one on earth, and Christ is not in the appearance called form. To say, I am the Christ, then, you can see what you're saying. You're saying, I am not in the form. Because when the form looked at the people crucifying, the form is not what was there. And the people crucifying him, they had to come to their time of death within 5, 10, 15, or 20 years later, 30, 40, whatever that, and they were not in the form. He was teaching the nature of divine life. Divine life is the only life there is. I think you'll agree to that. And divine life is undying. That was the human illusion. And we are learning it 2,700 years after Isaiah. 2,000 years after Jesus. But his mission was fulfilled by his teaching. I have come upon the earth to reveal that there is no death, that Christ is the name of every being, whether he appears to you in form or not. That all is under the rule of God, all is immortal, all is infinite, all is eternal. You are Christ, the eternal being, the infinite being, the perfect being. You are as perfect as your Father in heaven. I want to get this across because once we know the truth, every time it comes to your attention, you'll remind yourself that you've got to know it better. And finally, you'll get to know it so well that you will know that you are the eternal Christ, the child of God, as specified by God. That there's nobody has the possibility of killing you, because whoever looks out can only see an image. And your body is that image. When you look out, do not believe that image is you. You are the Christ behind that image. And get to work on that. Get to know it. Get to feel the rightness of it. Because someday you will say, thank heaven I learned that I am the Christ behind this image. This image is going to go, right? We know it. And every image does go. And I will not be in it. And you will not be in it, whether you know it or not. You will not be in it. There'll be somebody in it, some sense of person, and they'll mourn. You may be standing aside and looking at it, but you're not going to be in that image, and you're not in it now. And that's what our recognition has got to be. This is the kind of a class that goes many steps beyond the usual class. We're facing that which we have to learn. We can't do without it. Otherwise, they'll bury us, and we won't know that we're not buried. But knowing it, we will know. And there'll be some who won't even be buried. The degree of our capacity to know the truth will determine what does happen. And if you get the ability to stand back and to see not your eyes and its vision of the world, but to stand back and get a greater vision of the world, a soul vision which doesn't look at the things that people look at, a soul vision which feels the presence. If you get to spiritual consciousness and find that the consciousness of the presence of God is what you are feeling all around, you will be one selected for the next step. And that's a step that we're all going to take. There are no exceptions. Once we have lifted ourselves to that level of consciousness which can see that I've been looking at an illusion, they're not going to bury my relative. They're going to bury my concept of him, his concept of himself. But he will still be there, and I am going to know it. I am going to know that every person on the face of the earth is not what he appears to be. Judge not after appearances. And that's the appearance that I will not judge after. Somewhere I will find the ability to look at individuals who are flesh in my eyes and to see them with my soul and know they are divine being made of the pure Spirit of God, indivisible. Each is indivisible from the other. That's God's wish, and it's our wish. One indivisible self.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into our channel. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button below. It really helps us out. And why not share this video with your friends? Spread the word and help us reach more people. Lastly, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video from us. Thanks for watching and see you next time.